Hello. Hi, everyone from Miss Cummins' backyard. Happy Friday. Today we're going to be reading chapter 13 of course, by the great Hornspoon. It's called A Bushel of Neckties, which I remember the first time I read it, I was like, neckties? What does that have to do with digging for gold? As we left off yesterday, Praiseworthy has sort of earned his nickname of Bullwhip Griffin. Everybody said that his punch is so hard, like the end of a whip, which is called a bullwhip, that they are calling him Bullwhip. And then later they call him Bullwhip Griffin in the movie. It is not in the book. I still haven't looked to see if Bullwhip Griffin is on Disney Plus. Maybe one of you can check. Yeah, so they both have nicknames. Jack's feeling pretty good. They're going to get a tent. They're going to get a burrow. He's feeling kind of like a legit gold miner, so we'll see how it all goes. All right, chapter 13, A Bushel of Neckties. Sometime during the night, Cut-Eye Higgins left Hangtown for parts unknown. In the days that followed, Praiseworthy's name and reputation spread through the diggings. He was pointed out to new immigrants as someone of consequence, and Jack basked in reflected glory. The truth of the matter was that Praiseworthy himself actually began to enjoy his notoriety. And like chameleons, the two partners changed their colors to those of the Sierra Nevadas. They wore red miner shirts and jackboots and wide-brimmed hats against the summer sun. And after a week in the diggings, there was little of the butler left to be seen in Praiseworthy, unless it was the straightness of his back and the quiet reserve of his glance. And then, as if to live up to his reputation, he stopped shaving. And within a few days, he began to look decidedly fierce. Jack collected 4 tin cans against the day when they would stake their claim. They bought a dust-stained canvas tent at the Cheap John auction and pitched it beside Pitch Pine Billy's tent. All they lacked to go prospecting was a burro and a grub stake of beans, bacon, flour, and coffee. They shoveled dirt and panned mud from morning until night. Pitch Pine Billy taught them every trick he knew, including the setting of flea traps. After dark, they filled their gold pans with soapy water and placed them beside a lighted candle stuck into the dirt floor of the tent. "The candle gets the varmints to jumping," Pitch Pine Billy exclaimed. Pitch Pine Billy, why can't I say that? "About the only thing a flea ain't learned how to do is take a bath. They hop in that soap water and then they drown." The candles were $1 each, and some of the miners preferred the fleas. There were days when a man was lucky to wash out enough spangles to even pay for his grub. While an ounce of gold brought $16 far away in San Francisco, it was worth a mere $4 at the diggings, and it didn't buy much either. Onions were $1.50 a pound. Supplies had to be freighted in, and prices were sky high. Salt pork sold for 50 cents an ounce. Gold dust seemed more plentiful than flour. Hay was weighed out at 8 cents a pound. "Oh, I seen some mighty fancy prices around here," laughed Pitch Pine Billy, frying up a loaf of bread in his gold pan. "There was a fellow who come to the diggings with a jar of raisins. The boys ain't seen a raisin since they left home, and their mouths began to slabber. You'd think it was caviar in that jar. Them raisins fetched their weight in gold dust. Come to $4,000 for raisins." What if they had Oreos? I'd pay big bucks. Slowly, day by day, Praiseworthy and Jack added to their grub stake. They had blankets, a dozen candles, and a coffee pot. One noon, Jack pulled up a tuft of grass, and a glint of light from the roots made him gasp a nugget, and then his yell carried from one end of the ravine to the other. "A nugget!" Praiseworthy dropped his gold pan, and Pitch Pine Billy squinted. Jimmy from town, who wore a mustache twisted into 2 sharp points, came running over, and Buffalo John awoke from a sound sleep. Soon a dozen miners had left their claims to stand around and admire Jack's catch. The lump of gold was the size of an acorn. It was trapped in the fine grass roots like a fly in a spider's web. "Maybe it'll buy us a burro," Jack grinned. "Well, I don't know," smiled Pitch Pine Billy. "Maybe the tail of a, we'll call it, burro anyway." Buffalo John pulled the bandana off his head and polished the nugget. The miners passed it around, holding it up to the sun to watch it shine, and from that moment on, it became known as Jamocha Jack's Nugget. Ah. That night, Praiseworthy and Jack and Pitch Pine Billy went to town for supper. There was a letter waiting at the hotel from Dr. Buckby. It was written in a very shaky hand. "My dear friends, your letter finds me weakened by the yellow fever from Panama, and I can hardly hold this pen steady. Curse that Higgins fellow and the gang of highwaymen that you write of. Since I cannot leave my bed, please act as my agents in this matter. If you are able to recover my map, I will make you partners in the mine. 50-50. Act quickly, I beg of you, before all is lost. Praiseworthy finished reading the letter, and folded it thoughtfully. Oh, a generous enough offer, he said to Jack. Half interest in a gold mine? Jack's yellow eyebrows lifted. All they had to do was get on the trail of those road agents. We'll need guns, he said quickly. A 4-shooter would fit fine in his belt, alongside his hornspoon and buckskin pouch. Maybe he could trade his nugget for a pistol. Praiseworthy scratched through the stubble growing out on his face. What we need is a burro. A burro to chase the outlaws? Said Jack. Praiseworthy put the letter in his shirt pocket. He shook his head. We have no time for such speculations. First, those vultures no doubt ripped open Cut-Eye Higgins' coat and discovered the map. Second, they may have already located the mine by now. Maps, Pitchpine Billy laughed. Why, there's so many maps floating around the diggings, you could paper a room with them. Boys, let's eat. They ordered Hangtown fries, platters of bacon, canned oysters, and eggs, and Praiseworthy turned to Jack. What do you want to drink? Jack glanced up at the waiter. Coffee, he said. Coffee, sir, with a few acorns ground up in it. After dinner, Praiseworthy stayed behind in the hotel lobby to reply to Dr. Buckbee's letter. Jack and Pitchpine Billy went wandering along the street to see the sights. The auction bell began to clang. Maybe Cheap John would have pistols to sell, Jack thought. Let's go, he said. Don't mind, said Pitchpine Billy. The auctioneer placed a keg of salt butter outside the brightly lit tent, and the miners gathered around this delicacy like flies. They unclasped their jackknives and carved off butter shavings and ate them off the blades. Between the ringing of the bell and the free butter, a crowd had formed, and the sale began. Frenchmen rubbed shoulders with Sonorans and Chilens and with Germans and Missourians with Yankees and Englishmen with Kanakas from the Sandwich Islands. There were sailors who had deserted their ships to run off to the mines, and soldiers who had left their garrisons at Monterey and San Francisco. The auctioneer mounted a barrel at the rear of the tent. He was a paunchy man, kind of fat. He was a paunchy man in an open vest and a plug hat. What do you take for the hat, Cheap John? Someone yelled. Ain't for sale, said the auctioneer, but I got 10 pounds of Chinese sugar, that is. What am I bid, gents? Who give me $1 a pound? Dollar, who give me $1? I got $1. Who give me $1.50? Half. $2. Am I bid $2, boys? Two. Dos pesos, said a Spaniard with silver buttons down his trouser legs. Jack waded through the sale of sugar, a wheelbarrow, tin pans, butcher knives, and a sack of dried apples. The auctioneer seemed to have no guns. The miners stood around whittling and enjoying themselves. I got a bushel of neckties sent here by mistake, boys, said Cheap John. They'd fetch $1 apiece back in the States. What do you give me for the lot? Am I bid $10? $10? Okay, $9? $9? Anyone? The miners stood grinning and whittling and silent, and at that moment, Jimmy from town spied Jack and Pitchpine Billy. Let's go get something to eat, he said. My stomach feels like a cat in Hades without claws. Nine, called the auctioneer. We've done, said Pitchpine Billy. Done what? Asked Jimmy from town, twisting the ends of his mustache hungrily. 8, said Jack. 8, called the auctioneer. I'm bid $8 by that young fellow with the yellow eyebrows. Sold for $8. Jack stood as if struck by lightning. The miners began to chuckle. Looks like you just bought yourself a bushel of neckties, Jamocha Jack, laughed Pitchpine Billy. But I said 8, A-T-E, not 8 the number, Jack protested. That's what I heard you say, 8, answered the Cheap John auctioneer, pushing the plug hat to the back of his head. A-T-E. We ain't much on spelling around here. It was clear to everyone that the auctioneer hadn't expected to be able to sell the ties at all. You ain't going back on your word now, are you? Can't do that, whispered Pitchpine Billy. I'd rather see you break your leg than your word. Boy, you better pay up. The auctioneer was grinning. Why, you got them ties dirt cheap. Of course, we ain't much on tie wearing here at the diggings except to be buried in. And he burst out laughing. The miners looked upon the affair as harmless fun. Might be able to stuff a pillow with them, somebody called out. Maybe knot them together and make lasso some chickens. Jack stepped up to the gold scale and pulled the buckskin pouch from his belt. The nugget tumbled out. He borrowed a knife and carved half of it away bit by bit. Oof, it hurt. He clammed his jaw with anger, and then he picked up the bushel of neckties and worked his way through the crowd out to the street. Ain't so sure I'd even want to be buried in one of them things, a miner laughed out loud. Praiseworthy was coming along the street from the hotel, and Jack could barely face him. He had cut 2 ounces off of his nugget that might have gone towards their grub steak, or maybe even a gun. But even Pitchpine Billy and Jimmy from town were chuckling. "What have you got there?" Praiseworthy asked, raising an eyebrow. "Neckties," Jack murmured. "A whole bushel of them." Praiseworthy raised the other eyebrow. "Neckties, did you say?" "Yes, sir." Jimmy from town loosened his gold pouch. "I guess it was kind of my fault," he smiled. "I'll pay you for them ties, Jamocha Jack, as long as you don't make me wear one." "Me either," grinned Pitchpine Billy. Praiseworthy held up his hand. "Put away your dust." He looked at Jack. "That was a fine purchase, young Jack," he smiled. "A brilliant purchase indeed." Jack gazed up at Praiseworthy. "What?" "We'll buy our mountain canary with neckties." Excuse me. One more sneeze. I'm usually a 2-sneeze person. "We'll buy our mountain canary with those neckties." Pitchpine Billy crimped an eye. "You gone out of your head or something, Bullwhip? You couldn't even give them things away in Hangtown. The only necktie you can get on a man is made out of rope." Praiseworthy scratched his short whiskers. They were at an itchy stage. He smiled, half shutting one eye. "Unless I miss my guess, every man in the diggings will come begging for a necktie in a day or 2. They'll fight to get one." He picked up the bushel basket and swung it on his shoulder. "Come along, partner." The next morning, Praiseworthy and Jack helped Pitchpine Billy dig a coyote hole. "Once we hit bedrock, there's no telling the riches down there," the miner declared. "The Spangles, they keep working and sifting through the ground, earthquakes and all. It may take them 10,001 years to reach bedrock, but that stops them." By late afternoon, the big hole was deeper than Praiseworthy's head. They rigged up a rope and lifted out dirt by the buckets full. There were men all along the diggings coyoting for gold, and some of the shaft were as deep as wells. Jack took his turns at the bottom of the hole, filling buckets that were emptied into the Long Tom. The Long Tom was a wooden sluice box set in the stream, and rushing water washed the dirt along a trough, and the bits of gold were trapped in iron rifles along the bottom. Praiseworthy kept silent about the neckties. Even by the end of the next day, there was no rush to buy them, as he had predicted. But he remained unconcerned. Jack wondered if Praiseworthy had merely been trying to spare his feelings after the ridiculous purchase that he'd made. He was glad to forget it, and then he said no more. The following morning, a delegation of 3 men appeared on Pitchpine Billy's claim. Jack recognized Mr. Jonas T. Fletcher at once. The undertaker had brought 2 Hangtown merchants with him, and they came looking for Praiseworthy, who was at the bottom of the coyote hole. Jack and Pitchpine Billy hauled him out on a rope, and Praiseworthy looked as if he'd been dipped in dust. It clung to his eyelashes as he blinked. "If bedrock's any deeper," he said to Pitchpine Billy, "we'll be digging gold in China." "Bullwhip," said the undertaker. "You gotta uphold the fair name of Hangtown." What's that exactly?" "You've just been delivered a challenge." Praiseworthy began beating the dirt out of his slouch hat. "Oh, is that so?" "Yep, a fellow over at Grizzly Flats has heard about you. He says he can whoop ya." Jack looked up. Praiseworthy hardly blinked an eye. He merely continued knocking the dust off of his hat. "Is that so?" he said. "Yep, of course, he don't know B from a bull's foot to make a statement like that. He ain't exactly bright, if you know what I mean. Although I understand he can write his own name if you give him enough time to do so. But he is a regular big fellow. The mountain ox is what they call him. Well, how about it?" "It doesn't sound like a very fair match," said Praiseworthy. The undertaker nodded. "He does have you on height and weight and reach and general meanness, I suppose." "Well, that's not what I meant at all," said Praiseworthy. "It wouldn't be fair to him." The 3 gentlemen from Hangtown responded with a blank look. How's that?" Even Jack was startled by Praiseworthy's declaration. The mountain ox sounded enormous. Praiseworthy wouldn't have a chance. Had he begun to believe his own reputation? "From what you tell me, gentlemen," said Praiseworthy, "the man can barely read and write. He'll be at a decided disadvantage." Pitchpine Billy pulled his hat down over his ears. "Bullwhip, will you tell me what reading and riding has to do with a bare-knuckle fighting match?" I suppose that remains to be seen." "Then you'll fight him?" The undertaker grinned. "Not by choice, sir," said Praiseworthy, "but if the fair name of Hangtown is at stake, I suppose I must." The delegation smiled. "How about next Tuesday?" "Impossible. By next Tuesday we'll have our burrow and grub stake and we'll be far off prospecting. My partner and I have a fortune to make, and time is running out. We'll be returning this way by the middle of August at the very latest. You can plan the match for the 15th of August, sir." The 3 gentlemen from Hangtown nodded and departed. Jack gazed at Praiseworthy as if a complete stranger had been hiding through the years under the elegant manners of a butler. He was enchanted. But Pitchpine Billy whipped off his hat and jumped on it. "Bullwhip!" he snorted. "You've gone and lost your reason. Before the 15th day of next month shows up, you better make out your last will and testament." Jack had just lowered himself into the coyote hole when a sudden excitement spread through the diggings, and he pulled himself out again. There was a shout of voices back and forth across the stream, from claim to claim. "Oh, Quartz Jackson is back, and he's brought his new missus with him." Men dropped their shovels and gold pans and abandoned their long toms. Miners crawled out of coyote holes. "What's that? Him and the lady is putting up at the hotel." The excitement even touched Pitchpine Billy. "Boys," he said to Praiseworthy and Jack, "I ain't seen a lady in so long I nearly forgot what they look like." Praiseworthy rested his arms on the handle of his shovel and grinned. He gave Jack a nod. "This is the day we've been waiting for, partner. You just watch and see." Pitchpine Billy scowled. "Well, don't just stand there. Look at you both. Dirt sticking out on you like you ain't had a bath all year. Why, it's a disgrace. I'm ashamed of you. You heard what they said. There's a lady in town." Within 5 minutes, miners were everywhere along the stream, scrubbing and shouting and planning to go into town. Pitchpine Billy waded in with his clothes on and kept dumping hatloads of water over his head. I don't know why I always think of, like, if you've watched that show Survivor, you know, they're all super, super filthy. And then when they hear that their loved ones are coming to visit, suddenly they all jump in the ocean. They all try to start looking nice. Later, shirts and trousers could be seen on every bush, drying out in the mountain heat. Men stood at mirrors tacked to trees and got out their straight razors. Half a dozen familiar beards disappeared. Others were trimmed and shortened. Praiseworthy took his time, and when he and Jack emerged from their canvas tent, they were wearing their bright green neckties. Pitchpine Billy stood fluffing out his beard. He stopped and he stared. "Help yourself," said Praiseworthy. "That is, if it's all right with my partner." "Fine with me," said Jack. Pitchpine Billy grinned. "Don't mind if I do." The neckties were so bright that they could be seen across the river. Soon the miners who had laughed at Jack the night of the auction were swarming around the bushel basket. "I'll give you a pinch of dust for one of them neckties, Jamoke Jack. I'll give you 2 pinches." Pitchpine Billy was laughing. "Don't fight, boys, don't fight. Just get in line there. Looks like Jamoke Jack has cornered the necktie market. He caught you sleeping, didn't he? Just hold your pouches open and I'll pinch out the gold, since I got the biggest thumbs in these here diggings." Praiseworthy stood idly by with his foot on a stump, and he lit a long 9 cigar. Within 20 minutes, the basket was completely empty. Every necktie was gone. Pitchpine Billy pulled the strings on Jack's buckskin pouch and handed it over. It was as heavy as a plummet. Jack weighed it in his hand and tossed the pouch to Praiseworthy. "Well, that ought to get us a burro," he grinned. "And maybe even a gun," Praiseworthy said, taking the heft off of it. He tossed the pouch back. "Yes, sir, that Cheap John had better learn B from a bull's foot to get the better of Jamoke Jack. Gents, let's go to town." The miners had formed a crowd outside the Empire Hotel, and when Quartz Jackson brought his lady out onto the porch, the miners whipped off their hats as if it were the United States flag that they were looking at. "By the great Hornspoon," Pitchpine Billy muttered in awe, "a genuine woman." She had sparkling eyes and a smile for everyone. Quartz Jackson wore a vest with a watch chain across it and looked proud enough to burst. "We freighted up some cut lumber," he said. "The missus and me were going to build a cabin, and you boys are always welcome to drop in for tea. Ain't that right, Hannah?" "Oh, my Hannah Banana." "Ain't that right, Hannah?" "Hannah?" Pitchpine Billy murmured. "Ain't that the prettiest name you ever heard?" Quartz Jackson looked out over the crowd. He recognized Praiseworthy and Jack and gave them a little nod. "Step up, boys. I'll introduce you. Make it fast before you strangle in them neckties you're wearing." So as usual, Praiseworthy figures out how to solve the whole situation. And he figures, remember, ladies were very, very rare in the diggings. And even though she's spoken for, she probably has friends. So a lot of the miners are thinking, if I impress her, maybe she'll tell her friends about me and maybe be able to secure myself a future wife. So I think it's funny that they're all trying to impress her. And Quartz Jackson just, thinks he's the coolest guy ever. Although he probably should keep his wife pretty close, because I'm guessing a lot of people are going to, try to get her attention. So yeah, great chapter. What's happening next? So those of you who have, I don't have the cover. Those of you who have the cover that has actually the fight happening on the front, the Mountain Ox is the big, huge guy, and Praiseworthy is the guy with the shirt off, but very muscular. Praiseworthy thinks he has an advantage because he's smart and he's fast, and Mountain Ox is not so smart. I love when they said, give him enough time and he can spell his name. So he figures that his wits are going to help him win the fight. I don't know if that's really true. The guy's like 3 times his size. But I'm hopeful. He says, oh, yeah, let's do it later in August. Hopefully they'll leave and maybe the mining town will shut down and he won't have to do the fight after all. That would be good. All right, friends, I need to skedaddle because I need to finish writing the Kahoot for today, 1 o'clock. See you guys there. I want everybody to have a gold miner name. So something having to do with gold, money, striking it rich. So your name with something with having to do with money, striking it rich, gold, whatever. So think about what your gold miner name is going to be for Kahoot. I'll see you guys all at 1 o'clock. Talk to you later. Bye.